budget future, and appointed Alan Simpson of Wyoming and other right-wingers to come out with a recommendation, much like the Greenspan Commission in 1982, saying if the government's going to continue being run for the banks, if we're going to continue the bailouts we're giving for the banks, we're going to have to cut Social Security, we're going to have to cut Medicare, we're going to have to drastically reduce American wage levels in order to pay the banks more, which are his constituency. So the fight isn't to break up Europe, it's to break the working class, to break the unions, to lower living standards, to lower wage levels, and to put the class war more viciously back in business than anyone dreamed in the 19th century.
Well, is it also an attack on the euro?
Not as such. The attack on the euro is incidental. The attack on the euro is sort of a staged squeeze. It's not really an attack on the euro so much as saying we're going to starve the government's budget deficit. We're not going to fund the governments, and because the Maastricht Treaty prevents the central bank from funding government deficits, you're going to have to cut back social spending because otherwise you're not going to get the money, because you countries have already agreed to give up your national sovereignty and to turn it over to the European Central Bank that says if the commercial banks won't lend you the money to fund your deficits, then you're just going to have to cut spending. And they're telling Europe to start with Social Security, pensions, health care, and other social spending.
Now, the last time I checked, the euro was down to 1.19 to the dollar.
It's down from 160.
That's a huge drop. Do you think it's going to drop further?
Probably it will. There's no way of seeing where it will go, and the attempt is to squeeze it until the governments give up all hope of democracy. As the socialist government in Greece has already agreed to slash living standards. The big losers in this, of course, are the Chinese. They hold more euros than almost every other government put together. They've taken a huge loss from trying to diversify away from the dollar, and the moral is that there's no paper currency in the world that's safe anymore. The dollars was shaky a year ago. The euro's shaking now. Sterling's shaking now. There's no real point in any country running a balance of payment surplus if all they get is currency that's falling in price against every other currency.
Now, you've already alluded to this generally, but specifically, what is your estimation of the European Central Bank and the IMF bailout of Greece? Do you think that this bailout was good for Greece? And what? It
wasn't a bailout of Greece at all. Yeah, you shouldn't use their propaganda. It was a bailout of the German banks that have lent to Greece. Greece didn't get a penny of money. The money all went to the foreign creditors of Greece, and speculators were able to clean up by, first of all, crying havoc and saying that Greece suddenly was going to default, and then pushing way up the costs of insuring Greek debt, and then getting a free ride when the IMF bailout money to the banks came in. So Greece's economy has been sacrificed to pay the foreign banks that have been financing the Greek government deficit. The Greek government should have said, well, first of all, since it's a German bank, give us back the gold that you Nazis stole during World War II. And secondly, we have no intention of repaying you under the textbooks that you teach your students. Every national government has the right to act in its own self-interest. If I were running Greece, I would have redenominated all debts in drachma instead of the euros, devalued by 99%, wiped out all the debts, and had a clean slate. And then I'd let the currency float again under a new drachma. Greece could have very simply done all sorts of things. It wasn't able to do it because it's already a member of the euro. Fortunately, many associate countries of the euro, the Baltics, Hungary, Romania, countries that had planned to link their currencies to the euro but are now coming delinked, have the option of basically doing what was done in the 1930s and what President Roosevelt did, denominate all loans and debts in their own currency and do whatever they want with it. Just like Roosevelt negated the gold clause in debt contracts before he devalued the dollar in 1933, the other East European countries and post-Soviet economies, Iceland, can do exactly the same.
Well, right. I mean, the so-called bailout of Greece was, in fact, a bailout of foreign banks. And I was about to ask you what Greece should have done, and I guess you've already answered that question, but you've said that Greece really can't do it because it's a member of the Eurozone. Now, is there any way, once a country becomes a part of the Eurozone, that they can then leave the Eurozone?
Nobody's really anticipated that, so they haven't talked about it. But I guess, you had the southern states secede in the Civil War in this country. There's a question whether Europe is going to come apart. A lot of press in Europe is talking about really the core of Europe is Germany and France, and that may reemerge as the core. Nobody really knows what's going to happen.
How could the European Union been structured to avoid the rule of private central banks?
It would have, first of all, permitted central banks to do what they do in America, England, and other places. It would have had the national treasuries able to monetize the deficit or create the credit by government spending. It would have made the central bank and the treasury subordinate to the political arm of democratically elected governments. But when you have democracy itself undercut by the financial power of right-wing parties to convince populations to vote against their self-interest, then it's very hard to know how to restructure things. Once a population doesn't understand what's happening economically or financially, it's not able to act in its self-interest, and it's in a position of becoming a victim.
Right. Do you think that setting up publicly owned banks could solve a lot of the problems with predatory banking practices?
That would certainly help. The whole idea in the 19th century was that banking is a natural monopoly, and as such, it belongs in the public domain, just as broadcasting systems, roads, railroads, transportation, communications, phone systems all belong in the public domain. Once you privatize them, you let the owners of these monopoly privileges set up toll booths. Toll booths on telephones so that it costs a lot more to make a telephone call than it actually costs to produce the service of the phone call. There are toll booths to get onto highways. There are toll booths to use credit. Governments can create credit as cheaply as a commercial bank can do, namely right on a computer keyboard. All they have to do is credit a deposit, and that creates credit. It's bank loans that create deposits, not the other way around. So the act of lending and credit creation can be done freely, and if there's a charge for it, as in the charge of interest that banks charge, like 29% for credit card companies here, that's simply a toll booth charge. It's an extortionate monopoly charge, and this didn't used to be permitted under the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 and the subsequent American Anti-Monopoly Administration. It wasn't permitted under Europe's anti-monopoly legislation, but all of a sudden there's been a non-enforcement of all of this century of political reform that led to progressive price regulation, progressive income taxation. All of this has been rolled back since 1980, and we're going rapidly back to the early 19th and even 18th century when the banking interests and the feudal landowning interests dominated all of Europe and stifled it, which is, of course, why Europe lost out to the United States and other parts of the world.
So, how could finance capital be subjugated to industrial capital? Could this be done by passing laws?
Sure, or by simply enforcing laws that were on the books. The idea would be that you've recently in America had this discussion of the public option for health care as opposed to the private health insurance companies. What you need is a public option in banking and finance. There's no reason that the government can't operate its own public credit card system, its own public banking. In Japan and Russia, the largest banks are the postal savings banks. In the United States, most rural areas used to have postal savings banks, and those are really the only safe banks that there were. And until about the 1950s, these banks were major repositories and could have turned around and done whatever they wanted, just as credit unions could do whatever they want. There's no reason at all that government can't replace private banking, and also that government can't pass a tax system that would collect the unearned rent. There's no need for America's taxes to have been turned regressive so that a blue-collar worker pays a much higher tax rate than a billionaire like Warren Buffett. You have to have fiscal reform go hand in hand with financial reform. You can't separate the two. So you need to take a two-pronged approach, both of fiscal and financial policy, and they always have been essentially one, and that's the kind of platform that we're proposing as a test case in Latvia.
Well, the problem there, of course, in the United States and other countries is that the Congress, the legislature, is controlled by the banks.
That's right. They're the largest campaign contributors, and the Obama administration has appointed bank lobbyists as its major advisors. Larry Summers is basically a lobbyist for the banks and was one of the major lobbyists for getting rid of the Glass-Steagall Act in 1999 under Clinton. The Obama administration is being run by people way to the right of even Clinton, way to the right of the Republicans. That's the amazing thing. Even the Republicans, before the election, were opposing the bailout, and Obama and the Democrats were supporting them. So you have a situation today where the Democratic Party in this country and labor parties and social democratic parties in Europe have lost the whole ideology that was there at their outset. Their outset ideology was to support industry and living standards and consumers. And now they've been taken over by the financial interests and by the vested interests against labor and industry. And nobody really anticipated this, even at the end of World War II. At the end of World War II, if you'd told people of all of the increase in productivity that you've had and the technological breakthroughs, they'd think we'd be living a life of leisure right now. And instead, we're having the three-job family.
I'm speaking with financial economist and historian Dr. Michael Hudson. Today's show, Europe's financial class war against labor, industry, and government. I'm Bonnie Faulkner. This is Guns and Butter. Well, right, and you write that the Social Democrats, and I'm assuming that would include the Democrats here as well, have no real economic program anymore. And you write about how this was a consequence of the Cold War.
That's largely it. In order to fight for socialism, which originally they were founded to fight for, they had to purify socialism from being tarred with Stalinism. And they realized that people were confusing Stalinism in Russia with what was the social democratic reform policy of the Western policies. And until the Cold War was over, the Social Democrats and the Democrats had to take the lead in saying, we're not Stalinist Russia. We're not for a state-planned economy. We're for a mixed economy of checks and balances where the government does its thing and private enterprise does its thing. And they essentially stopped working on economic proposals and became political, and then they began to focus on inequity and become distributive socialists, and within the socialist movement itself, there was a shift away from productive socialists. Socialists have said, look, we have a more productive economic system that can increase labor productivity, increase living standards. And the distributive socialists have said, all you need is to redistribute income while leaving the current tax system and the current production system and the current system in place. Well, the current system itself today is something that, if it's left in place, is just going to polarize income and wealth more and more between creditors and debtors. And that's what you're seeing today, the most extreme degree of polarization between creditors and debtors, between rich and poor, that you've ever seen since national statistics began to be collected, whether it's in the United States or Europe.
Well, yeah.